Never heard of the Millennium Falcon?
Should I have?
It's the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
Should I have?
Welcome to the Sonic Bytes podcast, the freewheeling conversation and interview series for the eclectic music lover. In our first episode, we discuss an interesting question posed by musician Jordan Rakei on Twitter, where he asked whether we can name a band or artist that has managed to stay relevant for 30 years or more. From Radiohead and Beyonce to us dropping the first mayor bombs of the series, we discuss the pros and cons of staying relevant in music today, and what artists we would like to see stay relevant for the years to come. We hope you enjoy it.
Yeah. So I thought there was I found a couple of interesting stuff this week, sort of thinking about musical relevance. I watched a couple of really interesting Rick Beato videos about, he talks about a lot about sort of the relevance of different music sort of coming in and out. And he was talking about that are guitar heroes relevant today in terms of the way that music is and sort of the way that music's developed. And are there any guitar heroes left? And he sort of went on to define a guitar hero as being someone who's sort of on the same level as the singer in terms of sort of space they take up in the band, because obviously a lot of bands still have guitarists and they have guitar solos, but they're not sort of, you don't have guitarists in their own right in the same way as you had sort of previously, at least in popular music. And he was saying the one guitar hero left is, brace yourself, bomb incoming, John Mayer. First Mayer bomb of the of the whole thing. But he was basically saying that he's one of the only guys who kind of like, who is as much of a guitarist as he is a singer. And that's part of his sort of shtick, and he's still relevant today in terms of he still makes music that reaches the top 40. Maybe not music in his own right, but he collaborates with other people, and often what he brings is guitar playing. Like, you don't see a John Mayer record or a collaboration that doesn't have a guitar solo on it.
Yeah,
if that makes sense. He doesn't just feature as a vocalist, does he? You know, he features as a guitarist as well. And so, like, in that sense, he sort of managed to stay relevant as a guitarist and sort of single himself out as the only living sort of guitar hero, so to speak, in the same way.
Okay, let's try and frame it in regards. So yeah, there was a tweet that Jordan Rakei made recently that I thought was quite interesting, kind of piqued my interest in terms of thinking about artists and musicians and all sorts in terms of their relevance over the years. So he tweeted, name a band or artist that has had a 30-year career where the most recent albums are still relevant. I think that's quite a specific question in terms of not having the music stand the test of time and having the old music stand the test of time, but to be consistently making music over the years that stays relevant and to its decade. And I think that's, I just thought that was really interesting, and I couldn't really think of many bands just off the bat. I mean, obviously I'm not trying to say that I know all of music or anything, but obviously the only bands that really came to mind instantly were Radiohead. and I think they started in the early 90s, maybe even before that. And obviously they had some amazing albums in the 90s and 2000s, but they're still making, they've only made really one proper record. That's a Radiohead album this decade, but that album, A Moon-Shaped Pool, which I listened to last night on vinyl, it's just amazing, and it just feels like just so modern at the same time, but still staying true to their sound. And it's, I mean, you mentioned John Mayer earlier. He's evolved a bit, but he hasn't really been relevant for a 30-year career yet. So it's hard to say. I think Room for Squares came out in the year 2000?
2001.
2001, yeah. So, I mean, obviously he could still be making music in the next decade in his 40s.
My John Mayer nerd glasses on. It was September 2001.
Yeah, just
a month before his 24th birthday on October the 16th.
There you go. That's a Wikipedia page. And I mean, obviously he is still evolving his sound in this decade, but it's really hard to think of who can still make albums across all decades. I mean, one person I can think of like that's released an album in the past month is Bob Dylan. He's, I mean, obviously he's been around forever. I don't even know. Do you know when his first albums came out? Like freewheeling Bob Dylan.
I don't want to put it. I know it's early '60s though. I think it was 1962 or 1964 when freewheeling Bob Dylan came out.
Yeah.
I know he was a big influence on Simon and Garfunkel, especially Paul Simon, who was sort of a contemporary at the time, and their first stuff came out in 1968, I believe. So I think it was sort of the early to mid '60s.
Yeah, and he came out with an album last month. What's the name? I don't know the name of it, but it's just absolutely amazing. He's got some contemporary musicians to work on it with him, like the guitarist Blake Mills, Fiona Apple, who put out an amazing album this year, and it's just really cool to see an artist over the years like make music with different people and people from making music in that era. And I think it is still very much a blues based album. There's a lot of sort of blues and folk influences on it, but for some reason it sounds, because it's Blake Mills playing guitar all over it, and I think there's a bunch of other things, another guy called Bob Britt on it, and yeah, just he's found guitar contemporaries to play with him rather than just the same old guys from the 60s or 70s who might still be alive,
I think it's a really good question, actually, from Jordan Rakei, because I think a lot of things have to happen for you to remain relevant. If you think about maybe bands from the 1960s who have hits in the 1960s, or any artist who has a hit, if you think about the way that they then go out marketing the hit, going out and playing concerts, getting it on radio, sort of, you then become known for that song. So say, I'm just trying to think of an example of sort of like a one-hit wonder, like Hanson, for example, in the 90s, like Bop. Everyone knows Bop. They don't know many other songs by Hanson. And so if you're a casual fan of Hanson and you go to a Hanson concert, you're going to want to hear Bop. And so in a way, it's very difficult to stay relevant because you have to be constantly bringing out hits, basically, that younger people are falling in love with each time. Yeah, because otherwise,
it's a balance, right? Like you gotta, like, you can stay true to your sound and not try and invent, and you might alienate some fans but bring in some other fans, or you keep making the same music and have the same fan base, and maybe but it sounds dated as a result because
exactly, and then you get known as the guy who then makes a certain type of music. A good example, actually, I was thinking of while you were talking about Bob Dylan and Radiohead, was Paul Simon stuff. Actually, I know he's maybe not as relevant today, but if you think about a 30-year music career, he started in the 60s with Simon and Garfunkel, which was sort of acoustic folk rock, you could call it. He then went off into the solo record of There Goes Rhymin' Simon, and sort of started incorporating more a wider thing of American music. And then again, if you go into the 1980s, so obviously 1960s, you've got Simon and Garfunkel. 68, I think, is Bridge Over Troubled Water. Then you move into 1970s, where he brings out There Goes Rhymin' Simon, Hearts and Bones as well. And then he obviously goes to South Africa and does the whole trade embargo thing in the 1980s.
Yeah. And he was still making music in the 2000s. So if we're just going to quickly fast forward to whether he stayed relevant in the third decade of his career and even past that, then I mean, but it's hard to say as well with Paul Simon. My counter argument would be that maybe the music he was making in the 2000s, while still amazing to the people that listen to it, it wasn't relevant to maybe a much wider audience, or bringing in a new audience. It might be the same audience.
Yeah, I see what
he's
you
still
mean.
making music and making chart hits. On certain charts, but
my point is that he's had a 30+ year career, but isn't relevant now. But if you think about how much music changed from like the 60s to the 80s, which is about 30 years, late 60s to late 80s, sorry, it's 20 years to the late, even into the late 90s. Sorry, he's also brought out I can't remember the name of the album, but he went over to South America and sort of he brought that sort of music into his playing as well. That you have to almost completely reinvent yourself in order to stay relevant. And you run the risk of then alienating people, or it's almost like catch-22. Either you alienate your original fan base to go and do something else and potentially bring in new fans and hope the other fans come with you, or you stick to one thing and then get known as the guy for doing that one thing. And then the fans of, the fans who are fans of you for doing that one thing will obviously stay with you. But then, so it's either you're seen as a sellout, or you're seen as someone who isn't trying to grow artistically and is just doing the same thing over and over again. And I think it's got to be extra difficult for bands who are known as a certain thing. If you come forward as a rock band, for example, and then and then rock moves on. So if you think about in the 90s, sort of rock bands sort of proliferated a lot more. And then as music's moved on since then, that you almost it's very difficult to stay as a rock band in a musical market where rock isn't marketed to in the same way and it's not as popular. So in order to stay relevant, you either have to abandon the rock roots or stay with it and sort of go down with the ship, go down with the sinking ship, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think Radiohead did try to do that. I think that's why they're such a poignant example, because they really they made one of the most amazing rock records of all time, OK Computer, and then when they hit Kid A, it was just like full on electronics, and they really tried to. That was one of the most shocking albums of all time because it just sounded so different to anything. I think it's one of those things. I think there's many different lenses to approach this question. I think it's hard to judge relevance in terms of us looking in hindsight in different, back to different decades. There's so many albums that were, and there's so much music that was really, really relevant in the past, that were number one hits in a different decade that you just don't think, like stuff like Dire Straits. Obviously we love Dire Straits, I love Dire Straits music.
I love Dire Straits as well.
Yeah, but it's one of those things you wouldn't have thought of them as having number one albums, it's because I feel like it's not, their band name is not on everyone's lips, especially younger people. Dire Straits is not really the hippest thing for people to listen to. But they were, some of the biggest bands of another era, and obviously it was a completely different musical climate. And nowadays you can have access to so much different music at the tip of your fingers than before. So relevance is sort of redefined in the more the streaming space and the musical landscape nowadays.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess it's relevant for what as well, if Jordan Rakei is talking about sort of pop relevance, is that charting nowadays? Is it being sort of at the top of a Spotify streaming list? Is it that kind of relevance where you're in the public eye, or is it sort of a relevance in terms of, because obviously you can be relevant for different people for different reasons. In terms of blues music, for example, there are people like Gary Clark Jr. at the moment, Joe Bonamassa, who are still relevant. Derek Trucks, the Desi Trucks band, all of these guys who are relevant in that particular genre, and that genre is evolving and moving on and modernizing, irrespective of what pop music is doing. Obviously, they do inform each other, and there's obviously crossover, but and the same with rock music and rock albums. Rock albums are still bought out today, but they're not chart relevant in the same way as what we're now calling pop music today is, if that makes sense. And so I guess it's hard to say. I feel like at the same time I'm getting to an age where I feel like there are people younger than me that are making chart topping and the most listened to music in the world right now. And if we're talking about relevance in that context, it's hard. It's just hard for one person to judge. Because an 18-year-old nowadays that listens to K-pop and I guess more various alternative styles of hip-hop and R&B, whether Radiohead is relevant to them is I don't know what they think of Radiohead or Paul Simon or there's so many different types of music. It's so hard to say. Joni Mitchell had a career that expanded many a decade, and she evolved multiple times and had amazing records, and obviously she's a revered artist, but she went from folk to having jazz influences, and
which is of quite a wide spectrum, and she worked with different artists throughout the decades, bringing on people like Jaco Pastorius onto her records and more jazz cats.
Yeah, and even David Bowie, if you think about sort of the way that he reinvented himself, like not only obviously in a musical sense, but sort of in an actual stage presence sense as well, in terms of Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, and just the way he and then he took a whole persona on in order to stay relevant and to sort of to keep to keep reinventing himself so that he could keep making music that was interesting to him.
Yeah, and I think David Bowie, I mean, obviously his last album he brought on a bunch of like jazz people as well for his the album before he passed in 2016 and that was
what a year for passing musicians that was. God.
But yeah, it's really hard to say. I mean, I guess Jordan Rakei was maybe thinking of it in that particular moment a month ago, who's still making relevant music. And if we're talking about that particular moment, then that's 1990. So around 90, so any artist before 1990 still making music and releasing music that is relevant today. And I think that was just a really hard thing. I just realized I've had my air purifier on the whole time, so I'm just going to turn that off.
It's alright. Because of the way the mic's working, like every time you talk, I get a blast of air purifier, and then when you stop, it stops again.
Really? That's not good.
But no, it's all good. It's like vicarious air purification. Like I know the air's pure for you, and so like I feel better about myself.
We'll
as well.
Fix it in post.
We'll fix it. We'll fix the air in post. That is a good point though.
I'm just trying to think of it in a more sort of balanced way, like just drawing. Obviously, we got to draw on the music that we've listened to, and I invite anyone to challenge us and say, "Oh, there's like too many of this type of artists. You're missing out on this type of artist," and we're trying to just draw from as many genres as possible. I guess you can say the most relevant type of portion of music might just be like string music, like if we're talking about I mean, obviously that's not an artist or a band, but that's a sound. Maybe that's too much of a tangent. I don't know.
I think I guess you could also talk about like is he talking about like artists specifically, or because I think what's happened in the last few years is that producers and DJs have become artists as much as recording artists have become as well. I was listening to a really good podcast with Tim Ferriss and Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park, who's also in Fort Minor. And I never made that connection until the podcast. Which
you didn't know
cool.
It was in Fort Minor? What?
I knew M. Shinoda was in Fort Minor, but I didn't know Mark Shinoda was in Linkin Park. Yeah, who just didn't like connect. And then like I've watched the videos as well, and I remember going like he looks a lot like M. Shinoda from Linkin Park, and now that makes it. Yeah.
If you didn't know, Mike Shinoda is in both Linkin Park and Fort Minor,
and he's absolutely fantastic as well. Man, remember the name. It's just such a blast. It's such a great song to
are you about to call out Remember the Name as one of the greatest songs of the 2000s? Because please don't
do that ever. No. It is a great song though, and it's definitely got some a very special place in my heart listening to it growing up as a teenager, especially like because I used to swim like competitively, and it gets you like really hyped up to like do races and sort of events and stuff. So like every time I wanted to sort of like get in the mood for something, Fort Minor was on. Remember the Name was going, so definitely. But yeah, he was talking about the fact that if you're working with an artist, like he was talking about the recording process basically, and saying that like artists will go in and they will do it might take them 9 months to record an album, and the producer in that his job is to make them sound good, in that makes sense, like to take the sound that they've made and then turn that into something that is then marketable, as opposed to if you're working nowadays sort of, and that was more in rock music as opposed to like R&B music, and they were saying that the producer in that sense will make the track and the singer will then sing over the track, and so what I was thinking is in terms of the way that sort of producers have become more relevant, you have people like Herbie Hancock, for example, who's sort of stayed relevant and sort of moved on with everything. No, not who am I thinking of?
I mean, Herbie Hancock's probably a good example.
He's a good example, no, but I'm not. I'm thinking of the guy who is it Herbie Hancock? No, who's the guy who arranged some of the Michael Jackson stuff?
Quincy Jones.
Quincy Jones. Sorry, yes, Quincy Jones. And like how he's kind of like, as an arranger of music and as a composer of music, like he's stayed relevant over the years as well, and is still working now and sort of bringing out music.
Yeah, I think so. I think Quincy's
so like,
become it's become like a big daddy of music.
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
kind of supporting new talent. I think that's really cool. But he's not really making, like he's not. I mean, Quincy never really he made maybe one or two albums that were like Quincy Jones albums, but
I see what you mean.
Yeah, but I guess maybe if we just hone it into like artists, people.
Artists
on the album title, like people releasing recordings of their music. And that might hone it in a bit.
It does become tricky, doesn't it? Because I guess as well, at least in terms of like the 90s to the 2020s, which we're now in, like music has changed so much. Just in terms of the way it's recorded, the way it's produced, the way it's brought out, and the way it's marketed as well. That you've gone from selling CDs and having a record company sort of push you to be able to market, to being able to do to marketing on social media, being able to do everything by yourself, moving on to the digital platforms of Apple, Spotify, iTunes, and sort of having all of that as as a completely separate way of doing things. So it might be sort of harder than ever, to have gone from the 90s and to have stayed relevant sort of into music today. I mean, one of the bands that does come to mind, as well as Radiohead, is Maroon 5, I guess. It's not quite a 30-year career in that they didn't start in 1990
I think they're still in that John Mayer length of time.
I suppose, yeah.
So,
but in terms of relevance and reinvention, like it depends on like.
I think part of the brilliance of that question, I think, is that there's so many different arguments you can make. And the fact that you're stumped, there's not like things that you can think of off the bat.
Exactly.
That are widespread. Like obviously you can have niches of the genre who are making music over the years. You can have people come back and still making music that's amazing. I know like bands like Tool. I know D'Angelo, who made albums in 1995, started in the early 90s, made album 2000, then made album 2014, and then last year released some songs, and everyone's listening. Well, not everyone, but people are still listening to it. But again, you can argue back against that. So it's really hard to find those artists that are really like holy crap, that next album, like everyone's gonna listen to it. And I think maybe it is Bob Dylan. Maybe Bob Dylan wins again.
Maybe he's the
because I think as we're recording this episode, I think he did score #1 album this week. So,
did he actually?
And obviously maybe it's just people just really interested are able to access his music
because he's Bob Dylan as well, I suppose.
It's hard to. I mean, there are definitely artists that I hope will cross that 30-year threshold and still make like seminal albums.
Definitely.
But I'm not going to name any just to keep that quite open-ended.
Just so we don't curse it and jinx it.
But at the same time, in terms of at this specific moment in 2020, artists before 1990 that are still making like cutting edge. I mean, there have to be some festival headliners right now that we're just not familiar with their music as well.
Yeah, they're just completely skipping our minds.
Yeah. I mean, in essence, we're talking about bands from the 80s.
Yeah, it's got to be bands from the late 80s, early 90s who are still making music and bringing out new stuff today. That is like cutting edge and is charting basically. Music. Are we talking music that's charting now as well, or is charted in the last 4 to 5 years?
Just charted. I guess we have to expand to something that's charted in the last in some chart. Maybe not Billboard. Maybe
bang
not
on
Billboard
2020 is properly difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean Paul McCartney has tried some new avenues. I think since obviously he's been around since the 50s, 60s, but. He's still releasing a lot of music, and maybe it's not the most relevant, but he's still got a massive audience. And I think
Yeah.
and for some, I mean, he's sort of had ups and downs with the audience over the years. He's just such a long career. Don't know
Yeah,
what this is,
exactly.
but I'm actually thinking maybe when did Rage Against the Machine put their first album up? Because Zach De La Rocca was on a feature on Run the Jewels' album that came out last month, and holy crap,
Okay.
that song absolutely slaps.
He's still on there.
Just, but I think Rage were like mid-90s when they first. My internet is failing on me, but
I'm almost afraid to give it a go. We'll see.
We're gonna find it. Hang on, folks.
Hang on, guys. Also, if you can think of any bands that were bringing out music. Oh,
92. See,
19.
Yeah, maybe Zach De La Rocca is almost there. Then.
Maybe he's almost there.
It's
an interesting
yeah.
you know, it's one of those sort of like things that you wouldn't necessarily put together, sort of like Zach De La Rocca and Bob Dylan. Are the two guys who have stayed relevant in the last 30 years.
Yeah, I mean, Relevance is cross-genre.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess as
this
well,
is contemporary music as well. You know, obviously I guess this has to be people still writing music as well as.
Yeah.
Are we talking about people that are just.
And also, like, it's important. I guess it's important to think about, like, we're talking specifically about, like, essentially the UK and US charts as well. Like, I don't know very much about sort of music outside of that. That's sort of outside of my sphere of knowledge. Like, there might be you know, bands in other countries over the world who have stayed relevant for the last 40 years and they're still bringing out music now and are still you know, at the top of the charts. So if you guys do know of any bands that have been relevant who are still bringing out music now in any of your countries,
in Spanish and Japanese, but
Spanish and Japanese and French, like, let us know in the comments down below.
In terms of Anglo-American.
Yeah, in terms of Anglo-American stuff, it's tricky. I guess as well, like, it's just thinking about kind of like, in order to stay relevant as a band, like, is there a point where you as an artist would want to still be relevant? Because if you think about, if you say you started when you were, let's say the Beatles, for example, who were 16 when they started, and you want to have a 30-year career where you're still appealing to, you know, sort of popular music, which is young people. That means like in 30 years time, you're going to be 46, still bringing out music, trying to appeal to like 18 to 20 year olds. And like, obviously the music that you write as a 16-year-old versus the music you might write as a 46-year-old, you might have you have a different outtake on the world. You have a different, you know, outlook on things. You also have different like priorities and things. Like, do you want to be a pop star at 46 versus 60? You know, so I guess that's the other thing about relevance is sort of like, you know, are you making music to be relevant, or are you making music because you want to make music and you want to, you know,
I mean, that answers itself.
It must go deeper than that, mustn't it? You know, like,
I think that answers
I have to
itself
stay
in terms
popular,
of
I have to stay relevant.
The
you know,
Beatles, like the Beatles, they disbanded in 1970.
As a good example,
and I mean, I guess there are a
but
lot of factors.
But they carried on. They carried on making music, though, didn't they? But like, it wasn't like staying relevant wasn't necessarily the most important thing for them. I guess with a lot of bands, it's almost like I don't know, like there are two separate axes maybe with a lot of bands. Like, you know, like the band is moving on a particular trajectory, making music that they want to make, and like they're, you know, if we call it the band of, you know, like the x-axis of artistic growth, you know, you make the music you want to make and that just moves on the way it does, and then every now and again that intersperses with what ends up being popular, you know, but then if music moves on and you're still interested in doing what you're doing, like that, you know, that in that sense, like, sort of that's maybe why the relevance also dies, that like you want to go in a different direction to the way that pop music is going, and so then, you know, it ceases to be relevant.
Yeah, and I guess obviously in a band context, like, the people just have to get on with each other for 3 decades,
30 years, man,
and still evolve in the same headspace and
move in the same way.
Maybe they have solo projects and whatever, but I mean, obviously Bob Dylan is one guy, so he can choose whatever he wants around him. He can tailor
exactly.
But if you're Radiohead, like, I'm gonna keep bringing out Radiohead, but obviously they're probably the only band example that I can think of. Yeah,
exactly.
Then I mean, obviously they've had other side projects and things like that, but
It's an interesting thought, though, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah.
that like it's almost easier to remain an artist and stay relevant than it is to be a band and stay relevant, maybe, because then like there's less of a kind of like, I mean, it depends on the band and the artist, but there's greater freedom as an artist to go in a different direction because you can surround yourself with different musicians. Go back to the whole
Rage Against the Machine as an example, like they're not around anymore. They come back for a reunion every now and then, but but
exactly.
They're a very specific example.
But yeah,
I mean, is that? I mean, obviously, this is not a predicator of whether an artist is great or not. It's just one of those things. Maybe, it isn't a this band didn't stay relevant, and hence they're not good. It's just,
exactly.
Yeah, it's just one particular avenue of music.
That's a really interesting point because then there's a marked difference between being good and being relevant, and they move in completely different directions. You don't necessarily have to be like, they're not mutually exclusive. You don't have to be good to be relevant. You don't have to be relevant to be good. Sort of in both ways.
I mean, Sorry, no, you finish your point.
I was going to say, like, you can be at the absolute top of your musical genre for whatever, pick a genre: classical music, metal, funk, blues, country, and never have a top 40 hit. But it doesn't necessarily. But you could be an absolutely phenomenal musician, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to be relevant to be good, basically.
Yeah, I mean, to round us off, maybe we should try and name some artists that we might predict. If you put your money on it. Obviously, we're not going to, and it's completely subjective. But
because we're broke for one.
But maybe if we put some artists out there that maybe we can look back on this in 10 years time, or even 5 years time,
or even 30 years time in 2050.
Artists that just come out. No. What do you think? Like, for me, obviously we got to think of the biggest artists. You said Maroon 5. I'd say maybe like someone like Beyonce or something. I'm sure she's gonna be putting out some wacky stuff in this decade. That's
definitely
completely different. And maybe in this climate, maybe we're able to track these more, and maybe obviously we're in our 20s, so we have the musical experiences that we've had. So
exactly.
We haven't had a 30-year thing, sort of life experience where we're like, oh, this band really popped off when we were first getting into pop music, when we were in our teens. And we have to be in our 30s and 40s to actually have in real time experience that music in that decade.
Yeah, exactly.
And be able to judge and these guys are still relevant, Whereas obviously I can say that Radiohead's still relevant, but I think
we weren't around when they started becoming
OK Computer
relevant in the first place.
When I was born. So
exactly. That might be another question as well. If there's anybody at home who has been, obviously guys who are over 30, because we're not. But are there any bands that? Are there any bands that you guys sort of grew up listening to who are still relevant to you guys today? And that you still think are producing sort of cutting edge music that you still like listening to? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah. What are your artists then? Do you have any?
The ones that who I think have stayed relevant or who want to remain relevant. Yeah,
who maybe will stay relevant by 2030. Like, say if I ask this question in 2030.
Okay.
That's completely a wild question, but
that's good. No, it's a good question to ask.
Just chuck some ideas out.
I would, in terms of people I'd like to listen to and what they'd be doing sort of in 10 years time, I think it would be really cool to see what Maroon 5 are doing at that point, because I've been really interested the way they've managed to kind of reinvent themselves and sort of stay relevant from when they started in the early 2000s to now. So I think they're good contenders for having a 30-year career in relevance.
So we're essentially talking about like bands from around the 2000s.
I mean, for us, it would have to be, because like that's kind of that's the earliest I can remember listening to music, I guess. I think as another one, I think Pink. I'd be interested to see, because she actually started in the 90s with things like Just Like a Pill, and was still bringing out music in the 2010s with Raise Your Glass and Just Give Me a Reason, so I think she's got that sort of, she has she has no shame in kind of not no shame, but she has no issue sort of reinventing herself and kind of like having stuff, but reinventing, but also, you know, doesn't really seem to care very much about what the media are. You know, she hasn't got this pressure to kind of keep releasing stuff. She's just happy to release stuff as and when, and if it's good, she's kind of, you know, like, so she has a flirtation with, you know, sort of pop culture that kind of like comes and goes when she seems to want. So I'd be interested to see what Pink does in the next sort of like 5 to 10 years.
We'll see if she actually. Yeah, I think she'll have to really find some new collaborators and.
And I hope she does as well, because I've seen her live and she's an absolutely phenomenal singer as well, like stupidly good. And so it'd be really, really cool to see what she does in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. And my third, am I picking 3?
Yeah, 3.
Okay. And then third, so do they have to be relevant? Do they have to have had a relevance already, or can I just sort of like, or just someone I'd be interested to see what they do in the next 10 years?
I'd say maybe someone that has been relevant.
Okay, that's fine.
Or popular. Relevant is
I think maybe it'd be interesting to see. Go on then. If we have to go there, it'd be cool to see what John Mayer does in the next 10 years as well.
Agree.
Another John Mayer bomb. But like, it would be interesting to see like where he goes, because he's had a 20-year career already, or a 19-year career. And so it'd be cool to see sort of like maybe in the next 10 years whether he goes for, you know, sort of doing more solo stuff, whether he does more collaborations, because he brought out that song Inside Friend with Leon Bridges a couple of months ago. You know, so he's still able to, and he's collaborated with Khalid. He's done so many collaborations with sort of young artists now. And I hope I'd be interested to see if that continues for the next 10 years, or whether there comes a point where he just, again, he's more interested in making the music he wants to make, and you know that just tails off being you know, sort of relevant in the same way.
Yeah, it's I think with John Mayer it's interesting. I think he's not even reinventing his music that much. He's really reinventing him as a working musician. He's sort of going around and putting more like production credits and backing sort of things, and obviously he's gone on this whole Grateful Dead thing, so he's Dead and Company, and he's like completely reinvented himself in that respect and gained a different sort of audience as a result of that. So it'd be interesting to see how he keeps up in the next decade.
If you're listening, John, we'd very much like to hear some more music from you, and we're really interested.
Anyway, John Mayer is probably
and Maroon 5.
John Mayer is probably a very different episode. File that there.
We'll go. We'll save that one for later. Who are your top 3 artists that you would like to stay relevant then for the next 10 years?
I'd say, I mean, I already mentioned Beyonce. I think I'm not a massive fan of Beyonce, but I think judging
academically, it'd be interesting just to sort of see what happens, kind of thing.
Yeah, and she is popular and relevant. You can't, whether you're a fan of her music or not. I think it would be interesting to see what she does in the next decade.
Definitely.
Who else? I had an artist in mind that I've just completely forgotten.
Guys from the early 2000s who are still around today. I think that Shaggy should make a comeback.
I mean, Shaggy did do a tiny desk recently with Sting.
Speaking of, I was literally about. I just reminded myself of that. Yeah.
I think Sting's is a shout.
He could be another. You know what? Sting might fit actually.
I think he fits the bill. I mean, obviously,
because he was
he's not
obviously
the most unproblematic person, but anyway.
But the Police were around in the 80s. But then when he brought out that album with Shaggy, that charted, and that like there were adverts for that on TV. Like it was that big a thing. So like that could be he with Bob Dylan could be he could be up there as well.
Yeah, who knows? Anyway,
add another one to our list. Thank you so much for tuning in to Sonic Bytes. If you enjoyed what you heard, drop us a like or follow us on Spotify, Anchor FM, or wherever you get your podcasts, or leave us a comment on YouTube at Leo Kelly G Music, Twitter at Sonic Bytes Pod, or Instagram at Sonic Bytes. More episodes coming very soon. Stay tuned.